Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Nurse Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Now, a college basketball team that just a couple years ago was one of the best teams in college basketball has really hit on some hard times, and that is the Florida State Seminoles. But they just landed a big transfer portal addition in former Georgetown guard Primo Spears. I'm going to go over how much I think Primo Spears could help the Florida State Seminoles next season, and whether I think that Florida State could be a team that's competitive in the ACC next season. Now, Florida State basketball a couple of years ago was one of the best teams in the ACC and a top 25 college basketball team. When they had Devin Vassell a few years ago and some of the other basketball players that Florida State had, and they were one of the deepest teams in college basketball. They were notorious for playing 10 guys, and Leonard Hamilton, he always did a great job getting all of those players to go out there and play at a high level, and some of the guys that were on their team would only play 20 minutes a game, but they would still go to the NBA because they flashed so much potential. But again, Leonard Hamilton had to go out there and mesh all of that talent together and have one of the deepest rosters in college basketball, and he had a lot of success with it and even went on some deep runs in the NCAA tournament. But for whatever reason, Florida State the last couple of years has really struggled. And I think last year maybe they had some injury issues as well, but maybe the roster just wasn't constructed that great, and I don't really think Florida State had that go-to player that could really put a team on his back, and they just did not have great roster construction, and a lot of their bench did not step up. And Florida State is a far cry from the program that they used to be a few years ago when they were one of the better teams in the ACC. And Leonard Hamilton, he is in his 70s now, and some people might say, is he toward the tail end of his career, like Mike Krzyzewski, Jim Boeheim, some of these other coaches that have retired recently? I don't know about that. I still feel like Leonard Hamilton might have a couple of good years left in him with the Seminoles, but he is going to have to find a way to turn Florida State around because they were really bad last year at 9-23, and again, they did have some injury issues, but Florida State's roster is in a lot of flux right now, but with roster flux creates opportunity for new additions to potentially help you be a better basketball team this year. And this is where Amir Primo Spears comes in. The former Georgetown guard, and he also played at Duquesne as well. So this is his third school in 3 years. So he is going to have to get a waiver from the NCAA to make sure that he can play. But since there was a coaching change at Georgetown, he should be fine in that regard. But Primo Spears, he's a 6'3", 185-pound guard, so he's a little underweight, but he is a really talented player. He definitely can hit difficult shots, and he had to do that on a Georgetown basketball team that was not very great last year. He scored 16 points per game, 3 rebounds, and 5.3 assists per game, so he's definitely a good facilitator. He can pass the ball to his teammates at a relatively high rate, and he is a bucket getter. He does only shoot 41% from the field, though, and 30% from the three-point line, and he only shot 30% from the three-point line at Duquesne as well as a freshman, so I don't really think he's a great three-point shooter. He is a high-volume shooter, but he doesn't shoot that great from the three-point line, but he does shoot 79.3% at the free throw line. That is what he shot last season at Georgetown, so I do think that he is a guy that is a good free throw shooter, which could help translate eventually to the three-point line, but that is definitely not his strong point, which is very unfortunate for Florida State because they have been a team the last few years that has not shot the basketball well from the three-point line. But I think it's big for Florida State to be able to land Primo Spears because the other schools that were on his list of finals that he was considering to transfer to is Kansas, TCU, and Arkansas. Now, it's not really surprising when you do look at it why Primo Spears transferred to Florida State, because he wants to play, and Florida State was not very good last year, and they need players really badly to come into the program that can score buckets. Kansas, they did not really need Primo Spears. TCU, you could make an argument they could have used them. At Arkansas, they have a lot of guard talent that's already committed them to the transfer portal, so it's not that surprising why Primo Spears decided to transfer to Florida State. But can Florida State be a better basketball team next year with Primo Spears? I think the answer is possibly a yes, because you really can only go anywhere from here but up. Florida State was not a good team last year, even though they had some injuries, but they do have a lot of roster flux, and maybe Primo Spears can be that injection of life that Florida State has needed. Now, I think the downside to Primo Spears is, again, he's not a great three-point shooter, and he kind of reminds me of Caleb Mills, who played for Florida State this past season, who is in the transfer portal and is out of the Florida State program. They're both 6'3" guards that did not shoot the basketball well from the three-point line, and they're not really guys that can really lead a team on his back. I think Primo Spears might be a bit better of a scorer than Caleb Mills, so maybe he will be a guy that can be that leading scorer for Florida State this season and be able to make the guys around him even better than you did see with Caleb Mills. I think Caleb Mills is a good athlete, but Caleb Mills wasn't a guy that could go out there and score 30 points. Primo Spears has that capability. When he was at Georgetown, he did score at times in the 20s and 30s, so maybe he will be a guy that can do that for Florida State in some games that they're really going to need him to score at a high level. I think every team needs that kind of guard that can do that, so maybe Primo Spears is an upgrade from Caleb Mills, even if Caleb Mills is a better athlete overall. Matthew Cleveland, he's in the transfer portal as well. He is gone. He was a talented player, and he definitely was one of the best players on Florida State's roster this past season. He had some injury issues, and he just never got it all together, and I think he will be better better off at another program. But it's very unfortunate for Florida State that just a few years ago with Devin Vassell and a lot of other players that ended up going to the pros through the Florida State Seminoles are now not going pro anymore. Florida State is having a lot of issues developing talent. They're bringing players in, but they're not having a lot of success. So it is really interesting there. And you do look at also Florida State has brought in 2 more transfers that are not just Primo Spears. They brought in Josh Nickelberry, the former Louisville and LaSalle guard who averaged 11 points per game this past season, and for Jameer Watkins out of VCU who averaged 9.5 points per game. Both players I think will be solid additions for Florida State, especially Josh Nickelberry. I think he has the potential to have some upside for Florida State, even though he is in his 5th year of college basketball, so he's probably not going to get much better than what he already is and what he was at LaSalle this past season, but I do think he could be a solid player overall in the backcourt for Florida State next to Primo Spears. I think Jameer Watkins is a solid 4, but again, both these guys are coming from smaller schools. We don't know how good they're going to do at the Power 6 level because of the fact they're probably going to have to take on a big scoring load at Florida State. Maybe they'll be able to score around the same that they did at their smaller schools, but both guys probably will average under 10 points per game, so that's going to put much more of an emphasis on Primo Spears to average a lot of points for Florida State next season if they want to have any success. Taylor Bowen, he's a 4-star recruit that is coming into Florida State. He's the only recruit that they have signed in the 2023 recruiting class. He's a 6'9" forward, and he's probably going to have to play a big role early on in his career because Florida State really needs guys to be able to come in and have a lot of success right out of the gate. You also have forward Baba Miller out of the 2022 recruiting class. He is back. Darren Green Jr., he's back as well, and he averaged 13 points per game for Florida State this past season. He was a transfer portal player from last year, and Florida State has a lot of other basketball players from the 2022 recruiting class and other transfers that they have brought in that can have a lot of success for Florida State if they do improve, and that's going to be the key for Florida State and Leonard Hamilton. They're going to have to improve the players on their roster that are toward the bottom of the depth chart, and if they're not going to be able to do that, then Primo Spears is not going to be enough for Florida State to be a team that can compete in the ACC and potentially make the NCAA tournament next year. They're going to have to get development from the guys at the bottom of the roster, and they have a lot of guys that have the potential to improve, but Florida State, as is, their roster has talent. It has some solid players on it. They have a lot of guys that I think can improve next year, a lot of guys that are really young still, like Baba Miller, and there's a lot of other players from that recruiting class in 2022, and again, some transfers that they brought in that do need to materialize that talent, start playing at a higher level. But if Florida State can do that, they could be a team that can make noise in the ACC next year, potentially contend for an NCAA tournament bid. But if not, Florida State might have another long year in the ACC, and it might be toward the end of Leonard Hamilton's career at Florida State, and then who knows what head coach that they'll get next. But hopefully Leonard Hamilton can turn the ship around. I think that he did a good job bringing in Kevin Nickelberry, the former Georgetown assistant coach, to be Florida State's new assistant coach. He was a really solid recruiter, and you see it is paying off at Florida State. They were able to bring in former Georgetown guard Primo Spears because of Kevin Nickelberry, and I'm looking at Florida State's roster. It is one of the more talented rosters in the ACC, and it was actually one of the more talented rosters this past season, but it just never came all together. Injuries did play a role, so it's not all on Leonard Hamilton there, but I do think looking at Florida State's roster, the talent is there, but Primo Spears is going to have to be the head of the attack. He does have Josh Nickelberry and Jameer Watkins transferring in. I think both players will be solid next year for Florida State. I like Taylor Bowen as a recruit. I think he could have success for the Seminoles next year, and I like some of the younger players that they have on the roster that could have more success in the future, and if they do for Florida State, then the upside is through the roof. Florida State could be a much improved team than they were this past season, and they definitely will be a better team more than likely than their 9-23 record, but how much better is yet to be seen. But if Primo Spears, the Georgetown transfer, can average around 15 points per game, attack downhill, and maybe improve on his three-point shooting a little bit, maybe get it to around 33-34%, and he shoots around 80% at the line and is clutch at the end of games for Florida State, I think Florida State definitely could be a much better basketball team next year. The upside is through the roof, the potential is there, and they can only go anywhere from here but up. But for Leonard Hamilton to have a lot of success next season with the Florida State Seminoles roster, he's definitely going to have to get a lot out of Primo Spears, but as is, he is a big addition, and hopefully for the Florida State Seminoles, Primo Spears will be able to help the Seminoles have a better season in college basketball next year. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content, like this video down below, comment down below what you think about Primo Spears transferring from Georgetown to Florida State, and how good you think Primo Spears will have to play for Florida State to be a better basketball team next year, and whether you think Leonard Hamilton can develop the talent at the bottom of the Florida State roster and be able to potentially make Florida State a better basketball team next year. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I will see you next time.